Hello there, my name's Hawaka Blakey Whitecloud. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I'm also a skateboarder, and I started with skateboarding because I liked having fun, and then I transitioned into becoming a professional filmmaker, and now I have my own business. I was actually always poor at math, like super poor. And I think that's a function because I was finally diagnosed with ADHD in my adult years, about a couple months ago. So when I was performing my math studies, I'd always provide the answer, but I wouldn't provide the work in the answer. And so they would never give me like the proper marks, although my answer was correct. So I never really liked math as I was transitioning through school. And then when I graduated high school, I had a 58 in my last year. And they didn't want to, or they didn't think I should have graduated with pre-calculus. And so when I came to university, they said, hey, you actually need a 60 in order to take calculus to go into business school. And so they made me upgrade. And so when I did my upgrading though, the teacher that I had was amazing. He just wanted the answer. And so at the end of the course, and the way his teaching style was also different too. Like he recognized that you could just provide the answer, and in your breakdown, you could just show how you came to your answer in your own way. And so in that course, I got an A. And that was one of the first A's I'd ever gotten in math. When I was in university, I took a number of courses. I took Mandarin, so I took first year Mandarin. I learned how to speak Chinese because it's the most spoken language in the world. So sometimes if I know somebody can speak Mandarin, I'll say, Jin Tian Chen Qi, Han Leng, and they'll say, it is very cold out today. Oh, how do you know that? I'm like, oh, I took first year Mandarin. So I didn't know what I wanted to take. So I took first year Mandarin, I took Death and Concepts of the Future, I took some ethics courses, I took a number of different things. But over time, I discovered that A, I was either gonna do law, like my parents had done, because both my parents graduated with their law degrees, or B, I was gonna take business. And I saw that I could probably do skateboarding, not in law, but more so in business. And so that's how I came to decide to study business. One thing I wanna make clear is that I was, in terms of the school system, always poor at math. Like, I was always looked down upon as being a poor student in math, even though I was providing the right answers, or there were other things in my life that weren't allowing me to study in a good way. Like, just because those marks were poor didn't mean that I was a poor person or that I was a poor student. It just meant I wasn't giving the system what it wanted. And sometimes you cannot give the system what it wants. Sometimes you have to be true to yourself and only provide the best of what you can. And sometimes the best of what you can isn't like reflected in the system, right? And so when knowing that knowledge and reflecting back on my life, like, I should not have been as stressed or as worried about not having the best grades. Because if I hadn't been as stressed, hadn't been as worried, I think I would have been a lot less anxious and a lot more happier with my life in the moment. I started my first business while I was in university. And my first business was selling skateboards. And so we had a company called Red Riding Media, and it made 2 R's and an M. And the goal of it was to produce skateboards, but with indigenous themes on them. So you'd have like a nice sunset with some teepees in the background and maybe a dancer and a wolf and some northern lights, all these kind of themes that were indigenous, but I never saw represented in skateboarding. And so that went well for a while. However, I found that there wasn't really a demand for that type of, there wasn't a serious demand for that type of product at the time. And so I then let that go. And as I transitioned into the final years of my business studies, I discovered that I wanted to have a skateboard store, so a retail skate shop. And then B, I wanted to have a concurrent running television series through APTN so that one could be marketing and the other could be, the product revenue generating business. And as you can see now, I have no skateboard shop and I do not have any TV series, because that's how business goes, right? Sometimes your plans totally transition in a different way. And so when I graduated, I found that I developed a business plan for a skate shop. However, I wanted to turn it into more of a modern twist on it. So initially I wanted to have a skate shop in the North End, but then I thought, well, no, I'd rather service kind of the more upscale boutique clientele. And when I started creating a business plan for that, I found that there's no way that a retail store in this day and age can really survive in that way, and that the profit curve of the retail stores peak had already passed, and now I was going to start on its decline, and I thought, wow, there's no way I can do that. So that's how I never became a part of owning a retail store. And that was because as I was planning my business, I could just see that the numbers were totally were not matching up. And perhaps we can show some of those graphics here. So once I graduated, I started producing my own script and budget for a television series. And so I took out a book, or some books from the Winnipeg Public Library about how to produce your own script, and also about how to produce your own budget. And with the background in business that I had acquired through doing my own business plan, producing a budget was no problem, and also producing a script by then was no problem either, right? I just needed the tools from the library to help me put together a final product. And so once I had one, I quickly found out that APTN, A, was not interested because I had no experience in doing that, and B, I was going to have to find a mentor. And so I had to shop around my script and budget to several different production companies. And I finally landed on one, and APTN was interested. We started doing an initial proposal. It all was going very well, and then about 6 months later, right before we were about to start this production, the Canadian Media Fund, which was kind of the main funder at the time, pulled out. And so my dreams were crushed. And that's how business goes too, right? And it wasn't until about a year or so later that one of the producers who was initially on that first project contacted me and said, hey, are you still interested in doing this type of work? And I was like, well, totally. And he was like, cool, let's start a business together, because there's this new fund out where we can get about $10,000 for a episode or a webisode for this production for CBC Arts. And so that first episode turned into what he called Repo or Real Estate, but I actually don't remember what the name of the episode is, but it was essentially Indigenous skateboarders in Winnipeg reclaiming land through going on private property and having discussions about treaty land with the property owners. And that opened up a whole new world of really discovering kind of my indigeneity, but also I was like, yes, skateboarding and getting paid, yes, the dream. So in the first year of business, we had that $10,000 initial grant to produce a webisode for CBC Arts. We also used that initial product to then create a second episode for CBC Arts, and that was on colonialism skateboards. And so when I talked about my history of owning a skateboard company, I then saw another young man who lives in Regina named Michael Langan, and he was creating a skateboard company called Colonialism Skateboards. So instead of producing indigenous themes on skateboards, he was producing colonialism themes about Canada on skateboards. And so he was talking about the pass system, residential schools, the bison call, like all these themes of history, about Canadian history that weren't being told, he was doing on skateboard graphics, and I thought that was amazing. And so I wanted to profile him, so then I profiled him in CBC Arts. And so those two episodes were getting some good positive feedback and traction. And so we go from year one to now year 5, and we started with $10,000 of our production budget, and now we're at $150,000 for the latest production, which is called Star People, which is on the creation stories of Indigenous peoples from around the world, about how we all come from one star, which is the Earth. And so if we all come from one star, we're all related, and that we should be treating each other in a good way.
So this place, we're told that we came to this place through the first one that came here. Her name was Atagashishquill, Star Woman. She was roaming the cosmos, and she came across this place in the cosmos where it was a hole. And she looked through that hole and she saw the Earth. It was intrigued how that Earth looked. That hole in the sky, by the way, is the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. We call it Bagwangizik, the hole in the sky. And as she came to that hole in the sky and she touched Earth, she took a physical form. That being of energy took a physical form, and that physical form was us, the human beings. And when she came, she bought a gift, and that gift was this original star blanket. And the original star blanket had 7 points to represent the Pleiades.
The first production, I had a camera, but I didn't have a microphone, nor did I have lighting. So we had contractors. So we had contracted a camera crew, we had contracted a sound person, and then I had a lot of stock footage. So I was able to use that in conjunction with some of the footage that I had used with the contractors. And from there, that's how we were able to weave our first story. And in addition to the contractors, my business partner at the time, he would take the footage and create kind of like a preliminary edit. And he would say, hey, like this is kind of what we're looking for. And then I would say, oh yeah, for sure. I've done skateboarding videos before. And so I'll take that and I'll try and take what he has done as kind of like the draft. And then I'll make it my own. And so I started making my own, and he was like, yeah, but we need to change this, change that. And so, you know, draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, final product, and it was well received. You never make a profit. You never do. The business is essentially just to funnel money through and then funnel money to everyone else. And so on paper, like the production company really operates at kind of a null space. We have maybe some residuals, and that's just to pay off for proposals or other kind of auxiliary expenses that come up. But for the most part, it doesn't really make any money. I mean, I make money, but the business itself kind of just generates income to keep itself afloat. If you own a media production company, you're not really making like money per se, or the business isn't making money and generating profit. So for example, this latest production was a $150,000 budget, but you don't really get paid until way later in productions. And so you have to have access to capital initially. So when we threw in a proposal for this $150,000 project, they were asking for $50,000 right up front. And so I had to access a line of credit in order to have money to pay off expenses, initial expenses. So the traveling, hiring a camera crew, sound, accounting, all those expenses had to come up front. And so I had to pay for that. And then about 3 or 4 months in, then we started getting paid. And then about maybe like a year later, there will be additional tax credits that are then paid. So like, you really have to carry yourself and you have to budget appropriately, or else you will not be compensated. And then the production company will not stay afloat. So I've always had really good credit. And that's because my parents always taught me that you just have to have good credit, or else it's not gonna bode well for your future. That being said, if you do have poor credit, there's ways to make up and ensure that you can get to a point where you have good credit again. So paying off your credit card on time, paying off your cell phone on time. I used to work for the Winnipeg Public Library, and they'll even call you to collections if you have your fine over $50. And I remember one time they called me, they're like, hey, your fines are over 55. And I was like, whoa, hold on, here's the money, right? Because I was like, whoa, my credit, like, you know, my credit score, like I don't want that to go down. So maintaining credit was always a point that I made for my life to ensure that I could always access capital if I needed to. So in that way, debt is bad, but debt can be good and you can use it for good, right? And so in this way, for my business, I have good debt that I'm using to ensure that I make big projects and get paid well, while also ensuring that other people get paid well and on time, and that everything goes as smoothly as I can. And that's using math. So there's good and there's bad debt. Good debt is something that you use to ensure that in the future, you'll be able to make more income or revenue. So again, when I was doing my production, I had to take about $50,000 and use that for initial expenses for a project. And I had certain benchmarks that I had to make. So I had to ensure that, you know, that we already had, this much footage created, we already interviewed these many people, that we had, these many people hired. And so if I met those benchmarks, then I would again start getting paid. So that's an example of good debt. An example of bad debt is something where you're never gonna make any type of like income or revenue in the future. So, if I went out and bought, say, like a really expensive sports car, like a $50,000 sports car, that would never really generate me any money in the future, right? Unless I could like get paid to like have it in like a rap video or something. But even then, that's only like $300 or $500, whatever they have in their budget, right? That's actually not making me like some serious coin in the future. And in fact, like cars generally devalue at a really quick rate. So for example, like the last car my wife and I purchased, it was for sure I think when it was first for sale, it was $40,000, and we bought it used a year later. And by then it was already $30,000. So it was $10,000 less, right? So in 1 year, it devalued by $10,000. And so that's not something you really want to invest in, because that won't make you money, right? So there's good debt and bad debt we talked about, but investing is also one aspect of financial literacy that I think is important. And so you can invest in things that bring you money, right? We talked about the car, and we talked about carrying good debt for a big project. But one of the best things I ever invested in was a drone. So a drone, if you guys know what a drone is, it just goes whoop, right, and has a camera on it, and you shoot different things. And the drone was, I think, like $1,500. And then I just got my basic license for the drone, and then also certified the drone, which I think was maybe like $150. So that's like $1,650, right? So $1,650. And from there, I get paid usually about like $900 per day to fly that drone if I get hired by somebody. And so within 2 sessions of flying the drone, it already paid itself off plus profit, right? And so from there, I still get paid to fly the drone, and I'm still making money just from that initial $1,600 investment, right? And so, yeah, that was a really good investment, if not one of the best investments I've ever made in my life. So the Dakota have a unique history when it comes to colonialism in North America. Now, initially when the settlers came to the United States, they wanted to take over everything, right? But of course, there were certain groups who wouldn't let them, and so the Dakota were one. And so there was a territory around the Black Hills near North Dakota and South Dakota. And they said, no, this is our territory, you can't take it. And the United States said, okay, that's true. So we'll sign a treaty with you, and we'll work in tandem, and we'll teach you how to farm, we'll teach you how to handle money, which was known as mazuska, which is white money, which is white man's money. And so my great-great-great-grandfather at the time, known as Makpiaska, which translates to white cloud in English, he learned how to do commercial farming. And when the United States government finally reneged on their treaty with the Dakota, and the Dakota were expelled from a lot of them were expelled from Minnesota and other places. A number of them came up to Canada, and he was one of them who came up to Canada, and he was able to get a homestead. And a homestead was where, they had free land for anybody. And he was like, yeah, me too. And so he got his own homestead where he had to ensure that the land was taken care of. And so he had no problem doing that because he had skills in farming. And so he started to do commercial farming in that way. And so he then became a successful commercial farmer. And so he was doing well for himself. However, by then the Indian Act had passed, and then the pass system had came into effect, which meant that no Indians or no status Indians were allowed off of a reserve. And so he was forced to go onto the reserve, but he tried to ensure that his homestead would be taken care of and that he could do commercial farming there, but also on the reserve. And so he, again, was doing successful. But then they said, oh, no, you can't have your homestead. So then he only stayed on Sioux Valley, where he had his commercial farm. And then he started to be successful. And when I mean successful, I mean that he had good debt. He handled his own money, his own revenue, his own expenses. He was doing very well for himself. However, the Indian Act ensured that you could not handle your own money, that you could not sell your own products, that you basically couldn't work with other people, you couldn't work with machinery. So all those skills that everyone requires to successfully function in society, which is the key one, which is financial literacy, right? That was ensured that that would not be available to the people, right? To Indigenous people across Canada, for sure, right? And so now we're just getting to a place where we're relearning how to have good debt, how we're relearning how to handle our expenses and our revenues. And these skills are so crucial, and if we can learn them, everyone will have a better way of living, right? In discovering this history of like my ancestor Makpiaska and how he handled money, initially like I was just really angry, right? Because it was like, whoa, like we actually knew how to handle money. We knew how to handle debt, our revenue expenses, right? Our income. And so in knowing that, there's a bit of anger, but that anger can also then be translated into positive mindset, right? Of like, how do I take what that experience of knowing that we can be successful, how can I apply that to this moment right now and live the best way that I know how? And that is to like really research how I'm handling my money, and am I handling my money in the best way? And am I investing in things that'll bring me joy, and not only joy, but like just health, right? Am I investing in things that'll bring me and my family good health? These are the questions that I'm now answering. And with that mindset of knowing that like we have a good history about handling math, that makes me feel really good and hopeful that I can do anything really that I want, as long as I take care of the financial part. What does financial literacy mean in terms of financial freedom? So financial literacy means like understanding like how financials work, how your revenue and your expenses, either whether it's a business or even personal revenue and expenses work, right? And financial freedom means the ability to live the way you want and have access to the things you want in a good way. And so when I think of financial literacy, it's just maintaining my expenses to what I think I need to live. So that's like my food, you know, my water, my rent, and then even like my entertainment, right? Like there's a certain bit of like, you know, expenses that I have, but I also have to be cognizant that there's a maximum revenue that I can generate, right, between me and my wife. And so that we have to ensure that our expenses are underneath the revenue. And if they're underneath the revenue and we can live like that in a good way, then we're making just a bit of profit every little bit and ensuring that we have some savings in case something like COVID-19 hits and we have to have, you know, a little bit of savings there. And so because we did save, you know, we've been able to ride out COVID in a good way so that we haven't really been like really stressed about our finances, right? And so you always have to make sure that you have like a little base of money that you can always tap into in case something happens, right? Like in one case, I remember like, I think my first professional job, like I really didn't like my first professional job. Like I really didn't like going to the office. Like I just didn't like my boss. Like I didn't like the work. And so I had saved up, I think through my paychecks, I had saved up about $10,000. And so when it came to deciding, do I want to quit because I don't have another job lined up? Should I quit? I looked at the $10,000 and thought, I can quit. And I can like try and live off this for a little bit and figure out something else. And I know that because I have this, you know, because I have these savings, I can go and do something else where, you know, my passion brings me. And where my passion brought me was in media production. And that really worked out for me, right? And so like I had that, and sometimes it's just luck too, right? But like having that ensures that you can have a bit of financial freedom, that you can ensure that you'll have access to some opportunities that really make you passionate about being alive. For the future, what I hope for myself is to ensure that I handle my health in a really good way. And so I have 7 facets of health that I look after. So the first one is my physical health. And so that one is usually maintained through doing yoga or skateboarding or just going for a walk. The next one is my occupational health. And occupational health, I think I looked at as first like what my jobs were like, but really it's like, how am I spending my time? How am I occupying my time? And so of course I have to occupy my time with work, but like, what kind of work am I doing? Am I doing fun work, or am I doing something that I'm just doing for a paycheck? Am I not really like, is my spirit not really invigorated through it, right? And so I try and do projects where I'm just really happy. The other one is my emotional health, and that's ensuring that I talk through like how I'm feeling, whether I'm feeling happy or sad, and just ensuring that like I communicate those, because if I don't, people tend to keep them inside and then they just come out in like negative or kind of weird ways, right? The other one is my intellectual health, and that's talking about different subjects or ideas that I find really interesting that pique my curiosity about this world, right? Like there's just so many things to learn. And so learning, I think, is really crucial if you just want to ensure that you're growing, right? The next one is my environmental health. And so that's ensuring that like my environment is something where I'm very healthy. And so like, you know, do I have good people around me? Do I have good things around me? Do I have a warm shower? You know, those are all kind of simple things, but just making sure that my environment is healthy for me. And then the other one is spiritual health. So spiritual health is just making sure that my spirit is healthy, right? And like, I think like the best example of like covering off like all of those facets of health is skateboarding. Because skateboarding is physical. I get a lot of emotions get out there because I'm just, you know? And then like, oh yeah, and then I didn't talk about my social health, but social health is another one, right? And so just making sure that I'm talking with people. My intellectual health is peaked through skateboarding because I'm always learning different tricks. My environmental health because I'm just hanging outside and breathing fresh air. Intellectual health because I'm learning from different people. And then my spiritual health is just good because like I'm being outside and living in a good way and expending energy, but expending energy in a good way. Yeah, so skateboarding like really helps me ensure that I have, you know, all my health taken care of. And so really my goal for the future is just to ensure that I just take care of all these for the rest of my life.
We are indigenous and we are true to the land.